Good morning, everybody. So today we're continuing along our path of the 108 gates of Dharma illumination. And today we take up gate 61. So our gate statement for today says, the faculty of balance is a gate of Dharma illumination, for with it the mind is pure. So again, we're in the middle of a section of this text, this 108 gates, that's describing the 37 constituent factors of Bodhi, or awakening. We've looked at the 4 foundations of mindfulness. We've looked at the 4 exertions, or the 4 restraints. We've looked at the 4 bases of spiritual power, and now we're working on the 5 faculties that lead to liberation. So again, we started with faith or belief. These things are building on each other, moving through until they lead to wisdom. So again, in the beginning, we kind of take things on trust. By the end, we see things for ourselves. We understand for ourselves based on our own wisdom. So we've looked at belief, we've looked at effort. This week, the translation that I'm using says balance, but this 4th faculty is more commonly called concentration or meditation. However, the balance piece is still important. It's not that that's not in the mix. It's definitely there. It's an important theme because it's about settledness. It's about mental equanimity that comes with the attention being perfectly focused, right? So that balance piece is in there. Traditionally, it's the even-mindedness that comes when we can accept pleasant and unpleasant and neutral sensations, whatever is coming in. We see them for what they are. We accept them for what they are. We can meet whatever's coming at us in a kind of a solid, stable way. So that's all kind of in the mix for today. So concentration is what keeps us single-minded, if you will. In early practice, it was about keeping the mind focused on an object of meditation. Concentration was what allowed that transcendent wisdom to arise. It was already there. So throughout all of those teachings, there is a sense of non-separation of mind and object, or unifying subject and object. This should feel like familiar territory for us, right? Non-separation is, is kind of what we're all about. So that's familiar territory for us. So concentration also has this component of non-separation. So in general, it's about keeping our minds from wandering around, right? I mean, that's kind of common sense. It requires a certain amount of training. Certainly in the early teachings, there are a fair number of exercises and practices and things to do related to training the mind for concentration. So the more we settle, of course, the better we're able to concentrate, and the more settled and balanced we become. That cycle kind of goes around. Settledness and concentration support each other, feed each other. So there's a cycle that goes around and around. So concentration was said to be an antidote to to distraction by the 5 objects of enjoyment. So in other words, the things that are coming through the 5 senses of the body. Supposedly these are things we enjoy, or are things that can distract us. So instead of being swept away by these 5 elements of enjoyment, or these 5 objects of enjoyment, one concentrated on the true nature of reality. So in the Pali Canon, it says that only someone who can withstand the impact of the senses can develop concentration. So again, we're seeing in the early texts this advice or direction or something about being detached from the enchantment that comes with the things coming in through the 5 senses of this form. So if we think about what the word concentrate means in English, it's about bringing something to the center. Concentrate, right, means to bring something to the center. So one meaning is to remove impurities or extra material so that we're left only with the elements that we want, or the things that we want. So it's kind of like removing water from juice so we can freeze it, frozen juice concentrate. Or maybe we get, some highly concentrated laundry soap or some highly concentrated perfume or something like that. So again, pulling out impurities or extra or things that we don't want, so that we're left with something concentrated that is what we want. So Buddha describes the process of refining gold when he's talking about concentration. He describes how the goldsmith removes each kind of impurity from the gold, starting with the very coarse sand and moving through to the very fine dust. So little by little, the goldsmith removes these impurities and ends up with some material that he can actually work. Because if he leaves the impurities in there, that gold is brittle. It's not something he can work and form into shapes of, jewelry or coins or whatever that's going to be. That material can't withstand impact, if you will, if it's not purified and concentrated. So in the same way, Buddha says we need to get rid of the major hindrances, or at least let go of the major hindrances, and the impulses we have toward unskillful behavior, breaking precepts, kind of general misconduct. He says if we can let go of those things or somehow get them to let go of us, right? That is this process of sort of refining. We, like the goldsmith, start with the grossest, largest, biggest hindrances, and the more we practice, the more we become subtle, we see the more and more subtle sort of impulses to do things that are less than skillful. So we start with the major problems, we move to the moderate problems, down to the minor problems, as we're better and better able to concentrate. So again, these things are sort of feeding each other. There's a cycle that's happening here, right? We get more and more settled. We become better able to concentrate. We can let go of more and more of these delusions, hindrances, sort of obstacles to our practice. And, we can refine this whole thing. So driving out these hindrances allows for settling, allows for concentrating, and the settling and the concentrating allow for letting go of more and more of these subtle hindrances. So, of course, we have to be careful about what we're concentrating on. Single-mindedness is not in itself necessarily wholesome, right? If we are, fixated on satisfying our cravings and satisfying our aversions, then that's concentration that's loaded with hindrances. That's not actually helping us let go of our delusions and distractions and obstacles, right? We're focused on something which is actually not so skillful. So we are talking about skillful concentration here. We're talking about paying attention to what kind of concentration we're doing. So at first, the Buddha says our concentration happens because we kind of force ourselves into it. It's not something we may become to naturally. We have to sort of forcibly keep ourselves from wandering off. I'm sure all of us had the experience when we began sitting. Suddenly the mind felt busier than when we weren't sitting. Of course, the reason for that is suddenly we're aware of how unconcentrated, unfocused we are. So in the beginning, we do some things to sort of keep ourselves forcibly, on point. Of course, it takes a lot of intentional restraint to stay focused in the beginning, but the more we sit, the less we are pulled around by the hindrances, the obstacles, the delusions, the better we can settle. And this concentration happens more naturally without, our having to force ourselves into something or something that feels constricted or feels constrained. So in the early teachings, we hear a lot about meditative absorption and the various stages of absorption. And, what does that mean? Well, it's actually a way of experiencing non-separation. So being completely absorbed into something or absorbed by something or absorbed in something, right, feels like non-separation. So there were exercises designed to help practitioners concentrate on some specific quality of whatever their object of meditation was. And they did this so completely that their awareness was completely filled by this object. The awareness then expanded to include not only whatever this characteristic was that they were focusing on, but the object in its entirety, and this concentration sort of broadens and broadens and broadens. So this is concentration which is not about focusing on one thing to the exclusion of this broader reality. It's actually a gateway to the broader reality. So this kind of concentration is not, I'm going to focus on this and ignore everything else. I'm going to focus on this as a way to become not separate with this entire unified reality. So it's this broader or expanded awareness that allows for the emergence of balance, equanimity, stability, right? One image is that the mind becomes steady like the flame of a lamp when there's no wind. So the flame is not wandering around, and also the flame is not being pushed around by delusion, hindrance, the breeze or the wind. So one reason that concentration is important, it seems to me, is impermanence, right? We know impermanence is one of the marks of existence. We can't get away from impermanence. And so concentrating seems important when everything's changing all the time, including the conditions of our minds, what we're thinking about, how we're feeling, what we're perceiving. All of this stuff is in a constant state of flux. So if we weren't able to focus or concentrate on something, we would have some real discomfort, right? We would not be able to function properly. So, there's more than one thing arising at a time. Our attention could be pulled in every direction. For our own mental health, we need some kind of continuity, some kind of ability to pay attention and process and stay on task, stay on point. But of course, there's more than one kind of concentration. So there's the intellectual concentration that we use for studying, whether that's, studying schoolwork or studying the Dharma or solving a problem. Maybe there's a problem at work, we've been given a challenge or a project. There's that kind of concentration. When we're inventing something, we're building something, we're running an experiment, right? All of this is the activity of this psychological mind. So concentration in practice needs that psychological mind, but it needs the body, the emotions, our aspirations, our vows, the whole experience of this moment. It's not confined only to the intellect or only to the psychological mind. So we take this posture as part of our practice to support our focus. So we need to be paying attention to what's going on in this body. We need to be able to concentrate a bit on what's happening in this physical form. Not only doing, posture checks and those kind of minute corrections that happen all the time, but just being aware of what are the sensations in the body, what's arising for me. So, we live by precepts so that what we're doing with this concentration is ethical and wholesome. We can't leave that piece out of this concentration picture. So our concentration requires everything we have. Really, it is our entire experience of this moment. So we take a broader perspective in our concentration than just the sensory world. Our awareness includes both form and emptiness. It would be easy to say, well, I'm going to concentrate on form, and then I'm not sure what happens to emptiness. Or I'm going to concentrate only on letting go of what's coming in from the senses and live in this world of emptiness. And we know neither of those things is the way, right? We have to have awareness of both and carry both of those things. So, we need to see that samsara and nirvana are both right here. We can't let go of one or the other. When we do that, there's a better chance of us finding contentment in this world, right? In this moment, having that balance, having the equanimity and the stability of concentration. So then the objects of our grasping and our craving and three poisons and all of that stuff, they tend to lose some of their seductive qualities when we can really concentrate and focus. So sometimes concentration is referred to as samadhi. That's a fairly familiar word in the Buddhist world. That can mean focusing our attention on one object. But in our tradition, in the Soto Zen tradition, it also means to see and hold all things equally. So it's not just the one object of concentration. Can we see and hold all things equally? And there are lots of manifestations of that. Mind and environment are one. Or we say, we're not separate from our surroundings. The actor and the action are one. So, practice enlightenment, not two things, right? Zazen is doing zazen, right? There's no me separate from zazen or me separate from my activity. So, Dogen Zenji was not a big fan of the Theravadan view of concentration, as we'll see in a minute. So there are some differences in how we think about concentration, how we approach concentration, depending on time and space and what stream of Buddhism you're in. There are some real differences. So, of course, there is a huge connection between concentration and zazen. Sometimes we call our zazen shikantaza. The shikan means just. So when we sit, we just sit. We don't do anything extra. Sitting isn't a time to sort of ponder the challenges in our practice, or what am I going to say to my teacher tomorrow, or think about that last Dharma book we read, or that last Dharma video that we saw. Rumination. Not part of what we're doing in our zazen. Of course, we only do four things, right? We take this posture, we keep the eyes open, we breathe deeply through the nose, and we let go of thought. Those are the only four things we're doing in shikantaza, and everything else is extra, or anything else is extra, right? So we're refining the gold, if you will. We're removing the extra stuff so that what we're left with is something workable. I like that metaphor. I think it's kind of helpful. So that takes concentration, right? But not the psychological only. kind of concentration. So Uchiyama Roshi says, when we think of mind in its ordinary use, we usually think of the psychological mind or conscious awareness. In Sanskrit, mind used in this sense is referred to as chitta, in which case the expression shin ikkyo sho would mean to gather our confused mind together and concentrate on one thing. By definition, zazen would become some sort of exercise in mental or psychic concentration, or a method for training the mind to attain a state whereby all of one's ideas or thoughts about some object would disappear, leaving the person completely unperturbed. This is the superficial implication of munen muso, no notion, no thought. Zazen of the Theravadan teachings and of the non-Buddhist teachings are of this type of psychic concentration. Any method of psychic concentration works from the assumption that our mind is always in disorder and aims to still it by doing zazen. Dogen Zenji, however, never taught that zazen was merely a method of working to improve yourself, not a simplistic straightening out of your own life with no concern for those around you. Dogen once said, even if you have the mind of a wily fox, do not practice the Theravada way of trying only to improve yourself. So we see, he was not a fan. He had his own kind of approach to what does concentration mean and its sort of place in our practice. So concentration, of course, is one of the three kinds of elements on the Eightfold Path. This is not the first time we've ever heard about concentration. So it's pretty central to Buddhist practice. Of course, there's prajna, or wisdom, there's shila, or ethics, and there's samadhi, or concentration, and these are the three areas, right, on the Eightfold Path. Sometimes these things are called the three basic studies. So Uchiyama Roshi describes the samadhi category simply as settling down in quietness. That's how he sort of describes this entire aspect, if you will, of Eightfold Path. So the three elements that fall into that third category, of course, are right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration, sometimes called right meditation. So it's easy to get confused, right, about this relationship between concentration and meditation when these are kind of sometimes used interchangeably. When text gets translated that way, it sounds like these two things are the same. Somehow zazen and concentration and meditation and samadhi are all kind of lumped together in one in one thing. So, Dogen says, do not consider zazen to be the concentration and meditation of the three basic studies. So he's saying these things are not identical. He's not saying they're not related, but he's saying that's not identical, right? So Uchiyama Roshi goes on to kind of explain what Dogen's talking about here. According to common sense, meditation or concentration is considered to be a means to calm down one's mind. The thoughts, including emotions, produced in our brain. Since thoughts make noise and cause us to worry about one thing or another, we try to calm down. In other words, we try to bring our thoughts under the control of thought itself. This practice takes place on the ground of our thoughts. So he's showing us this kind of doesn't make sense, right? When we're feeling agitated and unable to focus or concentrate, it might feel like we should tell ourselves, well, just concentrate on what we're doing so that we can calm down. Uchiyama Roshi is saying the opposite. He says we can't calm our minds with our minds, right? He says, it's like trying to pull up the mat we're sitting on, which I think is a great picture, right? We can't use the mind to calm down the mind. It's like using your eyes to see your eyes. It can't work. So there's got to be something else happening here. So concentration is not about control. It's not about forcing our minds into some kind of activity or forcing our minds into some kind of mind state where no thoughts are happening or something. We can't force ourselves to calm down. Usually what happens is we just become more agitated about how unfocused we are. So, we probably all have that experience. You can't pull up the mat that you're sitting on. So it's not about getting our thinking to stop by driving out thoughts in some way. The harder we focus on, the more activity, we generate trying to do that, the less calm we actually are. So the second part of this gate statement is indeed about mind. So we need to understand what kind of mind we're talking about here. So again, the statement says, the faculty of balance is a gate of Dharma illumination, for with it the mind is pure. So Uchiyama Roshi says, mind, as the directly transmitted Buddha Dharma, is used in the sense of mind extending throughout all things, and of all things being included within mind. When we speak of a zazen based on the innate oneness of mind and environment, it should not be understood that zazen is a method of psychic concentration or of trying to still one's mind. So again, he's telling us, we have to think about mind a little bit differently. So let's take a few moments here to talk about what kind of mind we're getting at, what this gate statement says, what it means when it says mind is pure. So mind here, of course, is not the everyday thinking mind of the individual human being. It's the psychological function that arises from this collection of 5 skandhas that come together for some period of time. Historically, conflating mind, capital M mind, with the operations of the brain has led to this argument that practice isn't necessary because the thinking mind is already awakened. So, this was Dogen's question, right? Why do we have to practice? If we're already awakened, if awakening is already here, then what are we doing, spending all of this time and effort on our practice? Of course, this question leads him to China, leads him to find his teacher, Tendo Nyojo, in search of this answer to this question. And eventually he realizes that practice and awakening are not two and are not separate from mind, capital M mind. So this, of course, becomes one of the major themes in his writing. So this was an important thing for him. So the individual and his or her activities are certainly not outside of this one unified reality. Our psychological operations aren't separate from the total dynamic functioning of the universe. It's not that we need to get rid of them. It's not that they're bad, or that somehow we shouldn't be making use of them. We, of course, need them to function in the world. But this is not the kind of mind we're talking about, capital M, mind, in these kinds of Soto Zen teachings. So mind is also not a thing, something we can grab or grasp or completely accurately describe. Because as soon as we conceive of it, we are dealing with a copy of mind. It's only our idea about mind. So mind is the action of experiencing this moment in the most simple, direct, pure, authentic kind of way. It's about completely integrating individual self and universal self. So we don't leave one behind in pursuit of the other one, right? We don't leave behind individual self in pursuit of something we think is better, called universal self, or pure mind, or something, right? Both of these things are real. It's about holding both of them, I think, and doing that without a starting point or a fixed point of view, or getting stuck in only, the small self, or in only universal self. This is where we are before this sort of personal thinking apparatus starts to color and shape and form that experience by itself, on its own. So mind has no starting point, no frame of reference, no object. In this case, it's like, it's living in the highest degree of non-attachment. So it's not it sees everything, it attends to everything, but it's not getting stuck someplace. So Dogen described it, and I love this image. Dogen described it as like the characters of the sutra without the paper on which they're written. I just think it's a really interesting approach to this. It's the characters of the sutra without the paper on which they're written. Wow, that's kind of worth sitting with, I think. So when he translated Sokushinzei Butsu fascicle, or Mind Itself is Buddha, Buddha-san uses the term to actualize Sokushinzei Butsu, to actualize Mind Itself is Buddha. In Japanese, literally to do Sokushinzei Butsu, right? So he says, when a person practices Sokushinzei Butsu, or Mind Itself is Buddha, the person and Mind Itself is Buddha are both happening, right? So at that point, saying mind and mind, big M mind, small m mind, or Buddha and practice as different things doesn't make sense. If we are doing Mind Itself is Buddha, there's no separation. So that's in line with Dogen frequently telling us to have a spirit of undividedness in each situation. So no matter what our activity is, no matter what we're encountering, no matter who we're talking to, he says we should have the spirit of undividedness, which I think is helpful. Working wholeheartedly, putting undivided attention into the work, whatever that work is. Cutting the grass, washing the dog, speaking to your children, whatever that is. That includes seeing what each circumstance actually calls for. So we have to be completely one with the circumstance to see what's actually going on. As soon as we're only stuck here, right, there's a barrier. So undividedness is necessary if we're going to fully enter into that in a wholehearted way. So it's really about not being separate from reality, not putting up our own thought coverings, right, that separate us from reality. So shikantaza is just sitting with nothing extra, including an individual point of view, personal point of view, where we get stuck. Uchiyama Roshi wrote that sitting in order to gain control of our minds, get rid of craving, delusion, reach nirvana, is not the pure zazen of life itself. In other words, there's some division there. It is not an undivided activity. So it can feel like concentration, right? But we're not doing it with the pure mind of this gate statement. If I'm concentrating in order to do something here, get something here, that's not an undivided activity. So it's not an activity of pure mind. So it's flavored, right? It's colored with profit, gain, I want something, right? There's something in it for me. So on the other hand, shikantaza, in which we let go of thought, we let go of the perspective of only the small self, is the kind of mind that we're talking about here. So we're not denying small self, we're not getting rid of small self, we're not suppressing it, we're not saying it's bad, we're just saying we're not stuck with that perspective only. We can't ignore this body and mind, right? This is the ground of practice. So nobody is saying leave behind our personal experience and our personal perceptions. We hold those along with the broader perspective. So we don't concentrate only here, we hold both. So the same descriptions we've used for mind, capital M, mind, I think apply to shikantaza, right? The activity of experiencing this moment in the most simple, pure, direct, authentic kind of way. So completely integrating individual self and universal self without a starting point, a fixed point of view, someplace where we get stuck before, again, our personal thinking starts to color and shape and mold that experience. So again, we're not ignoring our experience, but it's not the only thing. It's not our only yardstick. So that's why Sawaki Roshi teaches about sitting zazen beyond gain and beyond satori, which is the way he puts it. Hojo-san says zazen is good for nothing. So according to this gate, when we concentrate, in other words, whenever we're doing whatever we're doing with nothing extra, then we have balance. Then our experience of reality is direct and complete, and we see ourselves and others. We have both wisdom and compassion. We have a direction, but we're also able to adapt as circumstances are changing because we know everything is impermanent, right? So we're able to be flexible and still be stable, right? We can have concentration in the midst of that, still be flexible and still be stable. So a minute ago, I talked about zazen and doing the 4 elements of zazen with nothing extra. And just now I said, that was one manifestation, if you will, of concentration. But of course, we can practice concentration in whatever we're doing by letting go of whatever is extra. And that's going to change a little bit, circumstance by circumstance. So, just like we're letting go of thought in our zazen, in a way, if we're concentrating as we move throughout the day, we're letting go of whatever is extra. What is extra in this circumstance? It might be my need to get something out of it. It might be that I'm projecting something from my own whatever, right? There's probably always something extra we can let go of. So that means, we can let go of having some idea about what's happening. And that keeps us from experiencing what's happening because I'm stuck with my own idea of this circumstance, right? So if I'm having a conversation with you, I can listen carefully. I can hear what you're actually saying, what you're really saying, not just what I think you're saying or what I hope you're saying or what I project that you're saying, what I think or expect I should hear from you. I can see who you really are and not who I think you are or who I hope you are or who I'm afraid that you are, right? I can stop trying to be somebody in my response to you. I can let my wisdom and compassion that are already here come out and lead what's happening rather than my need to impress you or be something for you or not be something for you or whatever, right? That's all extra stuff. All that stuff is extra. It's taking up space, right? If we can open our hands and let go of that, it's taking up space. The nothing extra really gives us, in the midst of concentration, spaciousness to really see what's happening, take in what's happening, and then make a skillful response to that, which is not about 3 poisons. It's not about my need for something. So again, concentration is bringing something to the center without attention kind of wandering around. When I notice my attention is sliding over to what am I going to say when he or she stops talking, I can let go of that, right? I can see that clearly. I can choose to let go of it. I can return to the actual conversation or the actual whatever I'm encountering here. So I'm not concentrating on whatever's at the center to the exclusion of everything else, the rest of my experience. I have to be aware of what's happening in this body and mind and not disregard that. And at the same time, I have to be aware of what's happening in the external world. So again, not unlike Zazen, we sit with the eyes down at 45 degrees. We don't sit looking ahead because I would be unaware of this if I'm only looking out. We don't sit just looking down because if I'm only aware of what's happening here, I'm not aware of the rest of the world. So this 45-degree angle is the middle point where I get to take care of this, and I also get to attend to what's happening out here. In the midst of concentration, I can do both of those things. So we might say that concentration is about refining our practice, right? We've heard about refining gold. We've heard about letting go of things that are extra. We become more and more aware of the subtleties. I'm sure I've told the story, in my early days of practice, hearing somebody ask a Dharma teacher after a talk, the more you practice, you've been practicing for a long time, do the questions become different? Because, we come to practice because we have questions, right? Like, what am I doing here? What's my relationship to the larger world? What is this self? We have lots of questions. So somebody asked this teacher, so, when you practice a long time, do the questions change? And she said, no, but they become more subtle. And I've always remembered that, what is self is a big question. It's a big, gross question. And then the more we sit, the question becomes more subtle. We're actually even refining our questions. What is self becomes a much more subtle question. So we become more and more aware of the subtleties of our experience and of our questions and of our practice. It might be the subtleties of what's going on in the body when we're sitting Zazen. When we start sitting Zazen, we may only be aware of the pain in our backs and our ankles going to sleep. And the more we sit, we might become more aware of our breathing and the energy moving around in the body and the micro adjustments that we're making just to stay upright, right? So it might be the little places that we get stuck in the three poisons become more subtle. Oh, I see anger, big anger. And then as I continue to sit, I maybe see the triggers for that. Or I see where I'm sort of being passive aggressive. It's not big anger, but golly, there's some resentment in there, right? We start to see the subtleties of that. It might be the assumptions we're making about who we are and the effects of what we do. Of course, there's a lot of talk now about we tend to think our experience is normal and the way we live is normal, and it's difficult to take in somebody else's point of view. So we might become aware of the subtleties of that. What do we consider the majority normal culture? And then what do we assume about that? We start to see some subtleties around that stuff. Also, the effects of what we do. Cause and effect is huge in this practice. The more we become subtle, the more we're able to say, oh, I did something, and there's a downstream effect of that. And it might be 20 years from now, and it might be someplace other than here. The view gets broader, and the view also becomes more subtle. So, for instance, in the beginning of our precepts practice, we're working at a pretty gross level. Don't kill people and take their stuff. I mean, that's a good teaching, right? That's good advice. And we start out and we just think, that's it. We're being told, don't kill people and take their stuff. Then we start seeing more subtle ways in which we break precepts. And, the subtle ways that we contribute to unwholesomeness, whether it's, our own sort of spiritual health or the health of others around us. We can see that anything can be an intoxicant, not just alcohol. We see words like don't let intoxicants in, don't bring them in, and we think, oh, alcohol? Well, then we start to see anything can be an intoxicant, right? What's the root of intoxicant? Toxic, poison, 3 poisons. Anything that's feeding our 3 poisons is an intoxicant. Well, that becomes, more subtle. We can see that not feeling anger and not indulging anger are not the same thing. When we hear precepts about anger, we just think that means, oh, I shouldn't be angry. Well, it's pretty hard in this human form, never to be angry. I mean, that can be unhealthy if we're suppressing and ignoring our anger. There is a difference between not feeling angry and not feeding that, not getting caught by that, not getting swept away by that, indulging it, right? So we start to see some subtleties. We can see that not slandering the 3 treasures is the same as Zazen is good for nothing, right? Not slandering the 3 treasures includes not using them for our own purposes. Zazen is good for nothing is not different from that. So the more we sit and the more we practice and the more we refine and concentrate, we start to see the real subtleties. No wonder this is a lifelong practice, right? If our practice was as simple as somebody gave us a set of 10 rules called the 10 precepts, and we just said, I'm going to live by those forever and ever, and that was it, well, it wouldn't be easy, but it would be a lot less subtle, right? When we really start to look carefully at what Dogen's teaching and what Buddha's teaching and what our ancestors are teaching, my word, no wonder this is a lifelong practice, because there's just so much subtlety in there. You may know that the original title for Uchiyama Roshi's commentary on Tenzo Kyokun was Refining Your Life. I think that wasn't an accident. I didn't start to think about that until I was thinking about concentration. And then I'm thinking about refining, going, oh, that's interesting. Refining your life. Like, what does that actually mean? So I think it's interesting to consider refining your life or concentrating your life into a pure form. If you put that next to refining gold, Buddha's image, about refining gold, I think that's kind of interesting. It really starts to sound like nothing extra. Refining your life really starts to sound like nothing extra. Includes, nothing in our lives that pulls us off the path, feeds our delusions, feeds our hindrances, clouds our vision, clouds our wisdom, right? So living a refined life in this case is not about sort of being an elite. We think, oh, refinement. Oh, we're going to be refined, we're going to sip our tea with the pinky up. That's not what this is talking about. And in fact, one of the end notes in Uchiyama Roshi's book makes the point, goes to great pains to make the point that this is not about having a lot of resources and being rich and being wealthy and that kind of society elite. It's, you can do this in the midst of poverty. We have to be careful about what we mean by refinement. So it's not about, etiquette or charm school or expensive education or something. I think it's about making careful, intentional choices about what our lives include and what activities we're actually doing. I mean, that's what it feels like to me when I'm thinking about refining, nothing extra. Okay, that means I have an aspiration. I make a vow. I set a direction that says I'm going to live in a particular way and let go of the things that are extra, right? So Uchiyama Roshi actually equates refining your life with bodhicitta, or the aspiration to practice and manifest awakening. So the Japanese term for bodhicitta is doshin, way-seeking mind. If you've been around in Western Zen, you've probably heard this term way-seeking mind. He says doshin means the aspiration to live the most refined life of the self in every moment, right? So refining is like right in the middle of our aspiration. What are we aspiring to do? We're aspiring to live in a way which includes nothing extra, right? So the bodhisattva vows are the same as living a concentrated life or a pure life of nothing extra. So we're doing this like right from the beginning, right? From the time we start practicing, we're on this path of refining our lives. So of course, there is another way to look at nothing extra. There can't only be one way, right? There's another way to look at nothing extra. Because of interconnectedness, there really is nothing extra. There already is, nothing can be outside of, nothing can be extra. Nothing can be outside because there's no separation, because everything is included within this one unified reality. So if we look at things that way, already there's nothing extra. So in that sense, living a refined life of nothing extra is simply to see with the eyes of Buddha. It's to see that there is inside and outside, and also that from the beginning there is no inside and outside. So in the world of form, we do things that are extra. We have thoughts that are not helpful. We have trouble concentrating. We have the hindrances and the challenges that go with this human form. So from the very beginning, there's an inside and an outside. There's a distinction. And also from the very beginning, everything is included. What is left out? There is nothing which we can call pure, impure, or extra, not extra, or inside, outside. So Zazen with nothing extra is just doing the 4 activities with this particular body and mind in this particular moment, and nothing else. But it's also Zazen that drops off body and mind, so there's no inside and outside. So both of those things are true in the same moment. Then we don't need to concentrate on something in our Zazen because there's already only this one unified reality. There is no inside and outside. So there's a kind of refinement or concentration that recognizes impurities or hindrances or delusions or extra and works to remove them, let go of them. And there's a kind of refinement or concentration that sees that there were never any impurities to begin with. So both of these things are true. Both of these things are real. We have to attend to both of them. We can't leave either one of those behind. So what would you like to say about concentration, about refinement, about pure mind, about any of those things, or whatever is bubbling for you in your practice? And don't forget to unmute so we can hear you. Anybody have something to say this morning?
Yeah, I guess I have a...
Doju, please. Oh, yay, we're going to hear some words, I think.
Oh, I think actually this one seems pretty straightforward.
I got to turn up your speaker here. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Hello,
hello, hello.
Oh, everyone can hear you but me, so I think the problem must be mine. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put my mic down. Hoshin, would you put up the mic on that? Yes. So that I can hear him? Try now.
Hello, hello, hello.
Oh dear.
What is going on?
I don't know. Everybody can
hang on here. How about that?
Can you hear me? Hello?
Hey!
Okay, I might get some weird feedback, but
there we go.
okay, so let's see. So I wanted to just make two quick comments about Uchiyama Roshi's writing. So one, because you were just talking about refining your life. So the original Japanese term for that is jinsei ryori, which is like a really funny kind of double meaning because jinsei is like human life or life, and ryori normally means cooking. It's the common Japanese word for like to cook or cooking, but it also has like an older sort of meaning of arrange properly. So it's about, Dogen's commentary on, the cooking for the Tenzo, but it's also, of course, about like arranging your life properly. So I just thought it's a funny kind of pun to point out. So the title has been translated differently in English. Like there's an older or newer version, I can't remember, How to Cook Your Life, and then there's another one, Refining Your Life, but both are actually accurate. And the second thing was there was one part where Uchiyama Roshi was sort of criticizing Theravada practice, like vis-a-vis Dogen's opinion. But I think it's important to note that Dogen would have been using the word Hinayana, and Uchiyama Roshi probably also was using the word Hinayana, and that means like basically like dinky vehicle as opposed to the great vehicle of the Mahayana. And it's sort of like a straw man tradition, that never really existed exactly. And by the time that people in Mahayana traditions were talking about this, it was just sort of like there weren't any practitioners of this school around. It was just sort of some idea that had been handed down to them of how not to practice. So I think translating it as Theravada is sort of anachronistic and kind of problematic because it doesn't really represent what modern Theravada practitioners do. And of course, Dogen wasn't familiar with any Theravada practitioners, and the school, as we know it, didn't really exist at that time anyways, because it sort of arose later, and it was one of many non-Mahayana schools. So I think that's just important to note in the sort of spirit of ecumenicalism. And then the last thing was sort of a question. So one of the samadhis that we hear a lot about in our tradition is the Jijuyu Zammai, translated sort of strangely of like sort of receiving and using the self, the samadhi of receiving and using the self. So I wonder if you had any comments on how that fits into the picture of concentration, because that seems important for Dogen.
So I don't know what's going to happen with the feedback here. It might get ugly. We'll see. All right. Hang on. Okay. I'm sorry. I'm not sure what's happening. Okay, Jiju Yuzamai. So I will tell you, I'm saving that because this is not the only run we're going to take at these 5 faculties. If you look farther down in the list of 108 gates, We come back to each one of them again, the power of each one of these things. So now we've said the faculty of each one of these things, and then we're going to go back and go with the power of each one of those things. So my plan was at that point, dig deeply into Jiju Yuzamai. So stay tuned for that. But yes, so this sort of self-receiving, self-enjoying Samadhi. Of course, it fits in to what we're talking about. I mean, there's lots of writing about this. My sense of it is, again, this complete undividedness or non-separation, where self is receiving and using and enjoying and turning that around as part of the total dynamic functioning of the universe, so that there is this concentration which also has the broadest possible view, right? So this self is doing what the self does, not separate from what the rest of the universe is doing. And it feels to me like there's this constant dynamic activity, which is about interpenetration. It's about interconnectedness. On the one hand, we need to make distinctions between people and objects and all that, but at the same time, each one of them in its Dharma position is completely manifesting whatever it is. It's suchness, right? So we've got all of these entities, beings, forms, completely manifesting suchness, receiving and using and turning that around, so that there's this constant, it feels to me like a constant flow, constant activity, constant interpenetration. But my plan is get deeply into that in about a month when we come back to these things again, because I think that's where the power is, right? So hold that thought. And Doju, if between now and then, you make a parking lot list, whatever I don't say about Jiju Yuzamai, please speak up the next time we talk about this and help explain that, because it's not, I mean, on the one hand, the words aren't that difficult. On the other hand, golly, to try to get our heads around Jiju Yuzamai, I mean, there's a reason there's a lot of writing about it. It's simple and also not so simple. So, you're going exactly where I'm going. I'm just not there yet. Is that okay? Very good. Thank you for that. Okay, other people who would like to say something. Let me try to figure out what's happening here. Okay, Sagan, give it a try. If we can't hear you, I'm going to send Ocean over to this other machine.
Yeah, I was wondering.
No, we got to turn that one up. Okay, so I'm going to turn me down, and we're going to turn you back up. I'm sorry for the awkwardness here. Okay.
Yeah, I was wondering about the basic terms that are often used, samadhi and dhyana. I've often wondered, are those synonyms, or is there some kind of distinction between those?
Is that mic up, and can you hear me through that mic? No? Okay, let's.
You should be able, Sagan can, Hoko.
Can you hear me if I talk from here?
More or less, yeah.
Okay. It might be easier. Actually, I'm going to pitch this one to Doju and put him on the spot, because he's actually studied some Sanskrit. And I think he's in a better position to answer than I am. Doju, do you have anything you want to add here?
Sure, yeah. So my understanding is that so the practice of samadhi is concentration, and dhyana referred originally to the different levels that you would achieve through the practice of samadhi. So there was like the first dhyana, where you enter sort of a basic state of concentration, and then as you move up, things get added and subtracted. There are different sort of lists. So like the second samadhi, I think you start feeling this sort of like joy, and then in like the third samadhi that drops away, and eventually you're left with just sort of this kind of bare concentration, and those are the different, referred to as the different dhyanas. So there were sort of levels of practice. And sometimes we hear that the Zen school is like the dhyana school, but actually originally the term Zen in that context was referred to like Zen masters, so like masters of the dhyanas. So people who could presumably attain a very high dhyana level. So it's not so much a practice, but a sort of level within the practice of samadhi is how I understand it.
So basically, it sounds like what you're saying is that dhyanas are levels of samadhi. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly, yeah. But of course, Dogen rejected that concept kind of ironically, despite being a Zen teacher.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Thanks, Doju. It's good you're here. I knew you'd have some useful insight there. What would other people like to say this morning? Comments, reflections, questions? You can certainly ask Doju if you don't want to ask me. Other things this morning? Satsu, are you waving at me? No? Okay, sorry. Thought I saw your hand up there. Brian, please.
Can you hear me? I just wanted to thank you as always. This topic in particular is very interesting to me and also helpful. And I especially appreciate the idea of the ever increasing subtlety of the practice. For me, for what it's worth, a way that this is more obvious to me is in my martial arts and specifically Tai Chi practice, because if you looked at me doing this 30 years ago and you looked at me doing this today, it looks pretty similar, pretty much like why has he been doing this for so many years? But inside it's completely different. And so it's, I have some experience with that kind of deepening practice in that realm, but not as much in Zen. So it kind of inspires me, I guess, to continue with the practice. So thank you. No questions, but just thank you for that.
Yeah, well, you can imagine when I look around the room, when we have people here doing sesshin, I can't necessarily tell who's been sitting for 30 years and who is their first sesshin, right? We take this posture, but what's going on in this body and mind becomes more subtle, right? So, we can't tell from looking at people's backs. Everyone's doing the same zazen, right? And yet somehow there's some subtlety that becomes, I don't know, it becomes accessible to us in a particular way. Other comments, questions this morning? Ado, please.
I just wanted to say that I like the combination of the subtle and profound. Just because subtle can sound like little, and even though it might be little or not even observable by somebody else, it actually is quite profound.
Yeah, so just because something is minor doesn't make it unimportant. Just because something is subtle doesn't make it unimportant. In the beginning, we're unable to see those things, and sometimes it's the subtleties that really are important, but they're hidden or they're not accessible to us, because of the larger delusion or the larger distraction or whatever. So yeah, the subtleties are not unimportant. Brian, are you waving at me? Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I don't know about in Japanese, but in Chinese, the word that's used for subtle is actually two characters. The first one of which means really small and minute, and the other one means wonderful or profound. So it's just what you were saying.
Interesting, very interesting. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, let's not lose sight of the subtleties. They're not unimportant. Sometimes they point us to something, right? So Ado, did you want to jump back in?
I just wanted to say, subtle also makes me think of refined, because refined sort of includes the subtleties. So sometimes when we see somebody, I think what brought me into Zen practice was observing a teacher who had such, I don't know what to say, grace, or such dignified bearing that it was subtle and profound. And Anyway, it attracted me. Whatever this person was manifesting attracted me. But it was subtle, but profound.
Well, and what's interesting is if you look at the writings of a guy by the name of Zayami, who was an actor, and I got to say 16th, 17th century, not sure the exact dates, came from an acting family and Zen practitioner. And his writings are very much about how do we refine performance from a sort of a practice point of view. And he really, I think, didn't see a difference between refining your life, if you will, and refining what you do on the stage, because you are, again, there's something happening there which is not about the individual self. And so as you refine your deportment as an actor, or your movement and your singing and all of the things that go with that particular art form, there is something subtle happening there, but there is also something profound happening there. You're not just trying to make a better performance. You're actually refining yourself, right? You're actually refining something else that's happening here. And I think that is, that can happen with whatever our activity is.
Right.
It might be music or performance or something. It might be how we bow. It could be any activity. It could be Tai Chi. It could be sports. It could be anything, right? So we have some opportunity for refinement, which is not, I think, so much about, well, there's a yardstick, and then if we perform properly, we match some kind of ideal model. It's like, well, who decides what the ideal is, right? There's a refinement about how we're moving through the world and how we're manifesting our awakening, right? I mean, that's what's kind of getting refined. So this whole thing about deportment, refinement is a really interesting area of practice. Right? Because it's not just about what do we do in the zendo, it's about how do we live, and how do we carry ourselves toward others, right? So it's very much about interconnectedness and about holding small self and universal self at the same time. Other things folks would like to say? Satsu, please.
Yeah, I appreciate Ito's comment related to grace and how, a teacher or someone on the path, can y'all hear me?
Mhm.
Someone on the path kind of demonstrates the practice in person. And the other thing that I wanted to say was the refinement of the gold, the picture of the gold and the sifting through and how everything settles. So that was a very beautiful image of refinement as part of the way we practice.
I like that one too, because I really like how, Buddha is saying if we don't pay attention to the impurities, we can't withstand the impact. That gold is brittle, it's not something we can work. So it's interesting just to consider that whole relationship, that whole activity. Yeah. Other things from folks this morning? Anything else folks would like to say? All right, let's do our closing chant, do some announcements. Thanks for your practice this morning. We will see you next time.